Okay, welcome to the StageLeft podcast, lifting the veil on the music industry by telling the stories of those with a unique vantage point. This podcast exists to provide free educational content for young musicians entering an increasingly complex industry by telling the stories of some of the unsung heroes behind the success. So go to thestageleftpodcast.com for all episodes featuring musicians who discuss in detail the writing, recording and performing processes with the likes of Elvis Presley, David Bowie, Michael Jackson, the Beatles, Fleetwood Mac, Nick Cave, Alanis Morissette, The Damned, Oasis, Morrissey, the Stone Roses, Jeff Lynne and Kraftwerk. Today we're joined by Ed Seed, guitarist for Dua Lipa, Kylie Minogue, Roux and multi-instrumentalist for Jessie Ware, playing guitar, bass, keys and piano only 3 nights ago to a sold-out Royal Albert Hall. Today we'll be discussing receiving lots of love from Elton John, Ed's approach to composition, playing the likes of Jimmy Fallon's show and Glastonbury, what makes the likes of Dua Lipa very unique, and how to best approach writing scores to a specific brief. So it's a pleasure to say that our guest today on the StageLeft podcast is none other than Ed Seed. Thanks for joining us today, Ed. How is it going?
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, all very good. I'm a little overwhelmed and flattered by your introduction, but you're very kind.
It's going to be fun. So, as I say, just a few nights ago, you were playing at the Royal Albert Hall, and I saw a video where you were doing a song with Jessie Ware, and it was you on a piano, Jessie Ware singing, and actually a third person on stage, which was someone doing BSL sign language, which I think was really cool. What I'd like you to do is 99% of the listeners of this podcast won't ever be on stage at Royal Albert Hall, and even fewer will be just on stage with the piano. So I'd like you to kind of walk us through, if that song was say 3.5, 4 minutes, what are you experiencing? What are your senses going through from the beginning to the end of the song? Are you looking at your fingers to see if they're playing the right notes, or are you so on autopilot that you actually are just wondering where your friends are in the crowd, or are you looking for cues from Jessie? I wonder if you could imagine that our listeners put on a VR headset and experience what you experienced for those 3 or 4 minutes. Talk us through it, because we'd all love to be in those shoes.
Well, terror, abject, sweaty terror. Yeah, that was a very special one. And we actually only did that one song. So we were opening an event called Letters Live, where they have actors come and read important or notable letters. And they have musical guests dotted throughout, and we were opening the show. So wow. we were the first act. So there was the intro. So yes, Jessie and I were stood very, very old fashioned, like behind a curtain with somebody holding it together underneath a rake of seats, hearing the introduction, waiting to go on. And that song, I mean, we've played Say You Love Me probably hundreds of times between rehearsals and shows, and it's always in that format. So it's always just Jessie and me on the piano, and so it's familiar in a sense. But the different things about that show were it was a real piano for a start. It wasn't a keyboard. It wasn't MIDI. It was an actual, honest to goodness grand piano, and we were doing it on wedges. So we were doing it on wedge monitors. We didn't have in-ears. We didn't have any of the usual sort of pop paraphernalia. It was just going into a concert hall and playing a song and being completely immersed in the environment. Because, I mean, as a lot of your listeners will know, the experience of doing a show on in-ears is very different to doing it on monitors. You know, monitors are, they're louder, they're more unpredictable, they're less clear. There's no click track or metronome. There's no customizing your mix, really. You just get what you get. But the upside is that you're really engaged in the space and in the room. And when it's a very special space like that, because having seen pop shows at the Royal Albert Hall, it can be quite full on to listen to. But when it's just a piano and a voice like that, it's stunning. That's what it's for. But in terms of what's going through my head is really just trying to basically put on a VR helmet of my own and it just be me and Jessie in a rehearsal room.
Right.
Because to think about the audience for a second, or to think about anything other than Jessie, is to invite disaster. Like, I've done that song hundreds of times. I feel like I can do it on autopilot, but to try that would not be good. and it's just that balance between thinking about it enough to be conscious of what you're doing, but not overthinking it so that your hands forget what they've done 100 times before. Because again, your audience will know whether you're playing the drums or whether you're playing the guitar. The second you start thinking about what your hands are doing, you're done for. That's it. We had a sound check, so I was sort of almost like visualizing again what sound check was like, because we played the whole song, and not thinking about the audience and not thinking about the ambience of that room and not thinking about all the things, just trying not to think at all, just trying to do, okay, verse coming up, and listening to Jessie, because she'd also said just before we were going on, she was like, I might stretch the first line out tonight, because it usually goes, say you love me, and she's got, maybe I'll do say you love me. I was like, okay, so are we going to do that or not? And she's like, oh, maybe we'll do it. So, no, we need to decide. We need to decide, because if that's stretching out, if you're adding a beat and I come in early, then we're going to look terrible. So we were having a bit of a laugh about that. I can't remember if we did it or not now. But
so when you said you're listening to her,
yeah,
what specifically are you listening for?
Her pace.
Her pace.
Her pace. Yeah. I mean, because I guess this probably is more relevant for your audience, but like the particular skill of accompanying is something that I guess it sounds obvious when you say it, but you're there to do two things for the singer. I mean, for a start, you're there for the singer. You're not there for yourself. No one is here to hear you show off how well you can play the piano or the guitar or whatever. They're there for the song. And you need two things for the singer. You need to give them enough time, good time, and enough harmonic information to pitch to. Like, that's the minimum viable proposition of accompanying. Like, you need to just stay and be there when they're expecting you, and don't rush them, don't drag them, give them a framework that they can rely on, so that if they do then want to drag something or push something or play with phrasing or whatever, you're there always as the sort of safety net to make sure they don't stray too far from time. And then they need enough harmonic information to pitch to. Like, if you're just playing too softly, or you're playing you're not covering the register well enough, then they won't hear themselves in context to be able to pitch. I mean, Jessie is she's never out of tune anyway. Like, she's just a fabulous singer. So, but she still wants to feel supported. And because I used to do a lot of this with Dua as well, with the guitar rather than the piano, and it is the same thing. It's time and harmony. But each night Jessie will do that song slightly differently. It will always be broadly the same, but when I need to listen to her voice, and when you have in ears her, like, even her breathing, to hear where she wants it to go, how fast she wants to do it, whether she's likely to, drag a post-chorus section. Because if she's dragging out a note, then I'm going to wait until she starts the next bit. Like, it's listening. And on a base, also, don't give them any surprises. They don't want any surprises in that context.
So you said a really interesting thing there about your role accompanying as an artist, and nobody wants to hear, what you can achieve. Given that you've been a front person of bands in the past, and you're an incredibly creative person yourself, how do you compartmentalize, or how would you advise someone to compartmentalize that part of their, I don't want to use the word ego, but that kind of part of them, which is, I'm a performer. Look at what I can achieve. I know that isn't what you're signed up to do, but where do you put that for those few minutes?
Oh, you leave it at home. Like, it's bluntly, it's not your name on the ticket. So you're there to serve the songs of the person whose name is on the ticket. And I mean, the best piece of advice I was ever given is play the song. Not like your idea of what the song could have been, or not what you would have done in the studio if you were there, not your idea of where it might go. Play it like the record. Like, and until you can play it exactly like the record, until you get the sound right, until you get the part right, and you can do it over and over again. You don't change anything. And once you've got that foundation, then there's room for expression if the artist asks you. If the artist or the MD says, okay, so here, have some fun with it, or, you know, have a think about what you might do in this section. If they ask for it, then you do it. But you pretty much don't, unless, you know, there's a certain like modesty that you need to have. But the other thing is, if you do have an artistic identity outside of playing for people, then that's where you do that. And that's if you're lucky enough to have that sort of outlet, then you sort of put it in there. And obviously that's partly why you'll get hired for things in the first place, because they seem to, you know, they would seem to fit in with your style, whatever it is that you've done. But you shouldn't force yourself in to places where you've not been invited in that way. You know, you have to play the song and respect the room, like, because everybody in there will, whatever room you're in, whatever rehearsal you're in, will have their own, you know, tons of their own experience and ideas and whatever. So it's best to sit back until you understand the space that you're in, and wait to be asked.
So going back to the fact that it was a real piano, given that you don't normally play that song, I think probably on a grand piano, how much of an impact did that? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, is that like kind of something you need to think about a lot, or, and what is that impact?
Well, I mean, the monitoring setup probably makes more difference than the piano in the end, because obviously the way that you're hearing the instrument is fundamentally different. It's not being piped into your head. It's coming in from monitors and it's coming back at you from the room. But a real piano just behaves differently to a program one. And also, if, you know, because the plugin that we use for all the shows is the same, the piano always sounds the same in my head. But this is a Yamaha Grand, and so it's as Grands go, it's very bright, it's very poppy, but it's differently responsive. And I do think the monitoring makes more difference, because with wedges you end up hitting things harder. You just do, because there's more space for you to fill. You're less self-conscious also of what you're doing in that way, which can be a good thing. I think in a room like that, where you're the only instrument, it is probably a good thing.
Having played on, because you've done a lot of high stakes gigs, right? So you played Jimmy Fallon, Good Morning America, Glastonbury, other TV shows, and this probably feels, from an outsider listening, it feels quite high stakes, particularly just walking on to do one song and then leave, and you can't kind of warm yourself up to it. What are you doing on a day that you're kind of drawing on experience from now that made you feel particularly relaxed or confident to thrive in that environment that perhaps you weren't doing in your early 20s, for instance, when you were first playing gigs?
That's a good question. I guess the sorts of gigs I was doing in my early 20s were so different, because it was like more of a sort of punk thing, and their sloppiness is kind of tolerated, encouraged, whatever. It's all part of the thing.
Yeah.
I suppose. I mean, the most nerve-wracking I ever did wasn't any of those. It was later with Jules Holland, because we were at the, and again that was with Jessie, because we were at the top of the show, and Jules had just done he was doing his opening spiel, like, oh, tonight we're at the Ali Pali Theatre, Muswell Hill, whatever, and there is an invited audience, there's a small audience, and if you're the first act, because they like doing everything in one take, it is the way that you see it, and if you're the first act, you mess up, you've got to make him do all of that again, you've got to make the audience do all of their thing again, and the opening of Free Yourself is just me, it's just the piano, and it seems to go on forever, and it sounds really mechanical. It's that dun 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 dun, and it when you're doing it, it feels like it goes on forever, because you have to be completely on and not rushing, because then when the drums come in, if you've been rushing, it'll sound like the whole thing slows down and it'll be terrible. So in a context like that, it's, I guess all I was doing the whole time that he was doing his introduction and the audience were clapping, whatever, was trying to play back in my head the pace of that song. And again, it's the same as the thing with what do you do for Jessie? It's pace, it's time. It's like that. Listen to that intro in your head. Dun, 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 dun. Don't get excited. Don't get overwhelmed. Just keep that click going the whole time. And then the actual click comes in your head and then you can start. So I suppose it's, again, trying to dislocate yourself from all of this stuff that's going on around. Another really hard one is Radio 1 Live Lounge. I remember doing that the first time I did that with Dua. We were doing Be The One, and that was the first time she'd done Live Lounge. And they have all of these like pre-recorded idents that are like, and now, really want, and it's all like the noise, the height. And you're really aware, especially in that one, that you are going to be live in front of the whole nation, basically. You're on the nation's radio station. And everything in there is designed to get your heart rate up as a listener. But as a player, and I was the first thing is you hear the guitar going down, bam, 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 and it just is designed to make you lose your mind, and that's really hard. But again, concentrate on the song that you're about to do, and also you have your people with you. You have your band there, you have your crew there, and everybody wants it to go well. And if you're in a nice, supportive environment, which I'm lucky enough that I always have been, you feel that, and you feel that wave of support, and that makes a big difference.
What's it like being a pianist on Jules Holland's show? Because I always think that they must, in the background, back of their mind, thinking, "God, this guy's a good player, though. You know, this is he's probably looking at me as a pianist as well." Like, does that ever cross your mind?
Well, I don't regard myself as a pianist for a start.
Okay.
Like I'm a sort of generalist. So I always imagine that anybody who's as good as he is will be looking at someone like me and this guy. But that said, we had years earlier we did a Dua thing with she won something called the European Border Breakers Awards. And for some reason, Jules Holland was presenting them, and it was in Belgium, I think. And between takes, so we performed as the band, and then they were doing a whole thing with all the actual artists. And between takes, Jules Holland just came over to us, to me and Matty and William, who were Dua's band. I don't know whether it's because we were the only British band or whatever, but he just talked to us. He just chatted with us as like one musician to another. And he was so nice, and he was so accommodating and generous, and just talking to us as if we were on the same level, which obviously we're not. But he was so like memorably interesting and welcoming and nice that when it came to do his show, I mean, I didn't get to meet him again, but if in that specific instance, looking at someone like that, I've seen who he is as a person when the cameras are off, and when he didn't have to talk to us. He didn't have to be nice to us. He could have just gone back to his dressing room. He could have just sat there and looked at his phone for 10 minutes, but he came and talked to us. And so in that particular context, yeah, I felt good in the room. I was more overwhelmed because Sleaford Mods were next to us. Oh, wow. And I love Sleaford Mods. And I was more thinking like, are they going to be into this? Are they going to like what we're doing here? But they clearly did. And they also obviously must be extremely nice people.
Great. That's a great story. Now, we talked about these high stake environments, and, you know, thankfully things have played out well. Have you ever had a situation where something unexpected happened live, and how you had to adapt to it on the spot?
Yes. I mean, obviously there's unforced errors, and there's just making a mistake, a terrible mistake, and that's really audible, and you know it's bad, and you know the ones where the artist actually looks at you as like, you know, there have been those, but that stuff you just have to try and eat it and get on with it and not let it ruin the rest of your gig, because it is going to ruin the rest of your gig on some level, and you know it is, and it will be the only thing you think about until you get to do another show, and then you do the thing and you don't make a mistake, and then it's gone. You're sort of absolved of it. So yeah, there's that, but then there's technical stuff. The first time we went to South by Southwest with Dua, which would have been 2016, maybe 17, I don't know. We had 3 shows at South by Southwest, and the first one was some like YouTube showcase thing or something. And at that stage, it was still just the 3 of us in the band, Dua, and it was a guy called Pete Abbott, who is Dua's tour manager. But at that time, he was also doing front of house for us and running our monitors from front of house. But they had a local person who was doing it as on the stage. And when you go to America, some of your audience will know this, some of you won't. American stuff runs on a different voltage. So where UK stuff has a very high power of like 240 volts or whatever it is, American is 110, I think. So you have to get these like transformers to step down the power. Otherwise, you're going to fry your equipment.
Wow.
And just before we went on stage, I plugged my pedal board into the wrong power supply. So my pedal board had been set up to run on American power, which is small, and I plugged it into the UK power supply that we brought with us, and I fried everything on my board. And we were supposed to start playing in 15 minutes. And I was just kneeling down, looking at these useless, unresponsive boxes, looking at the amp that they'd hired for me, wondering what I could get out of that. And Pete came to me and he said, so he was the one who was doing our front of house. He gave me a bit of advice that has stayed with me. So we had 15 minutes to stage time. He was like, okay, whatever you're trying, spend 3 minutes on it. And if it hasn't worked, do something else. And that 3-minute rule gave me, okay, so I've got time to do 5 ideas of how to fix this problem.
That's smart.
And
That's
so
really
the work around, and and he's been doing this for a long time, so obviously he's very wise. And I did find a workaround. It was like, okay, so there's this effect on the amp, and I can power this pedal that doesn't seem to be fried off this tuner, and I can do this and that, and we got through it. But then, on stage, then we had the additional fun that something in the monitor desk wasn't communicating. And so all we had for the whole show was the click, and for some reason, the left side of the BV channel. We couldn't hear ourselves. We couldn't hear Dua. We couldn't hear any cues or anything like that. We just had the click. And we were trying to communicate this to Pete, but we didn't have any way of communicating to front of house. So we had to do the whole show trying to hear off front of house, basically. And so we probably therefore did a tighter show because we were so safety first. It was like, okay, just put your hands exactly where you know they need to be. Don't try anything. Don't try anything interesting. Don't have fun with anything. Just get through it. Just deliver it. So it was probably quite a tight show.
And when the incident happened, what advice would you give to people in regards to, like, do I let Dua know in that situation that this has happened, or is she better off not knowing this has happened because it could impact her performance? Like, when
she will know. She knew something was happening because
yeah.
she didn't have anything in her ears. But she,
in regards to your pedals specifically.
Oh no, she didn't know. No, need to know about that.
Yeah,
no,
right.
Absolutely not. No, if it's a problem that is not, that only directly affects you, then just deal with it. And yeah, the artist doesn't need to know anything that they don't need to know, like, unless it is critical to, because no one's going to come out of that gig being like, yeah, she was good, but I don't think the guitarist was using the right phaser. I don't think that was his A choice of reverb. Nobody is going to come out of the gig thinking that. It's only about the artist, and people don't know something's wrong unless you tell them. And why would you tell them?
You've worked with a real diversity of artists, which I mentioned on the intro, and there's some we haven't even mentioned yet. What are the specific strategies that you've acquired over the years that allows you to play so effectively in so many different genres?
I only play in genres that I love, and I love a lot of them. I mean, I come from a kind of, I guess, more of a sort of slightly indie, slightly country background. But I came to music quite late. I didn't really start playing or listening to music till I was like 13, 14, 15. And then went sort of all in and didn't really I didn't try and stick to any one thing. I just went to anything that I liked. And I have the kind of personality where once I get into something, I have to like go, like all the way and learn everything about it, which is probably quite tiring to be around. But I guess it meant that when I came into Roux, because that was my sort of big break, that was my first big pop break, I was brought in as someone who could play like rhythm guitar. So I was hired by producer Ian Sherwin, who was working with Ellie at the time, and he brought me in for one session to play one specific riff on the song Uptight Downtown. And it was a single note thing, and I came in and did it. And that day, I just got on so well with Ellie, and we had such a wonderful day that at the end of the day, she was like, "So do you want to be in my band?" I was like,
"Wow,
sure." But we had she that day introduced me to like lots of disco songs that I'd never heard, and I kind of knew that I liked disco music in the same way that, you know, everybody likes disco music, and I vaguely knew it was like more than Saturday Night Fever, but not much more. And she started to play me all these songs and tell me like what it was really about, and you know, things like Shame, Shame, Shame by Shirley and Company, and Detour by Karen Young, and all these songs I'd never heard. And I just learned from her. She schooled me about disco particularly. And I guess in my professional life since then, there has emerged this like disco spine to things. I didn't set out to be a disco rhythm guitar player for like extremely credible pop songwriting ladies like that. I didn't set out to have a brand like that, but it went with my taste. It went with what I wanted to do. And so I guess it's because my commitment to any genre that I play in is genuine, and I don't try and do anything that I don't understand. Like even when it comes to making music for TV or ads or whatever, if it's a brief that's in a genre that I don't feel like I really understand, like I might understand the basic tropes of how it fits together, but if I don't really understand where it comes from or what it's about, I won't do it. But I guess that's a very long way of saying that, again, listening to everything all of the time, and deep listening to a few things is better than shallow listening to everything. Like,
and have you ever been in a situation where, I'm sure you would have done, where you've been given a piece of music to learn really, really quickly, as in like, I don't know, we got an encore, we didn't really rehearse it, we're going to do this song type thing. How do you learn best quickly if you're in a kind of high pressure environment? It doesn't have to be a particularly well populated gig or televised or anything like that, but how do you learn quickly if you need to learn a part quickly?
I mean, I learn everything by ear. I did have some piano lessons when I was like 12, 13, 14. So I did like the most basic familiarity with learning music, reading music, but I basically can't do it anymore. And I never learned it for the guitar at all. So it's all ear. And I guess the thing that speeds up learning songs is understanding song structures and how they're put together, and like writing songs was the best way to learn that. Understanding that most songs are some shuffle of the pack of the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords, and that the 5 is likely to follow the 1, or whatever it is. So that gives you a head start. So basic like songwriting chord theory, I suppose you would call it. Like I was once put on a gig where I had to learn 18 songs in 2 days.
Wow.
That was quite a lot.
So let's walk through that process. So, okay, so you get the list of songs. What's next?
Well, I also got given all the parts, obviously. So I got given the stems. So I work in Ableton. I would set them up in Ableton. I would just DI my guitar, get in headphones like this, and listen to the song itself one at a time. You know, listen to the song maybe like 3 times before playing anything. Make some notes in my phone of what the structure of the song is. Then just do the chords, so you understand what harmonic world you're in, and then if there are particular melodies, do those one by one and note it all in the phone. So when you then refer, or I use a phone, but whatever you do notes in, and then move on to the next one really quickly, and then skip back to, so do them all the way through, learn songs 1 to 18, and then go backwards from 18 back to 1.
Why 18 backwards?
Because then you will really find out how much you forgot about 1 to 10.
Nice. Okay, that makes sense.
So and then sort of keep going back and forward that way.
That's smart. And when so you said that you transferred it over to your phone. Do you use a particular app for that, or do you then get to a point where you are having anything on stage that's kind of cueing you on an iPad?
Oh, I won't have anything on stage.
No,
I can't have anything on stage. I mean, if there's
it's got to go into the brain, and that's it. That's it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's like actors learning lines. There's no substitute for just doing it. And yeah, I mean, I guess it helps if so this artist in question had a very tight, well-formed style. So his songs were in a particular world, and they were all in that world. There weren't a lot of curveballs, and there weren't a lot of, oh goodness, here's the tropical house one. Like it was, he had a style and he lived in it, and he also had, you start to pick up songwriters' particular tricks and quirks that they do, structurally. And even if that isn't relevant to the specific part you're playing, it's helped you to get into their world of like, oh, what would this writer do in this situation? But again, that comes more from songwriting than from being an instrumentalist, because I still don't regard myself mainly as an instrumentalist.
Yeah,
so because I'm not very good at any of them, really.
Well, you're doing a pretty good job playing Roll Out Hall, but there we go. And Jules Holland, but yeah,
all the white notes.
Yeah, classic. And we're going to get to some of your songwriting in a second. When you've been on tour as part of a touring band, what do you think are the dynamics that need to be at play so that remains feasible, being in the same place with people for a long time in different environments, different countries, eating different foods, that type of thing? So what works to keep that kind of dynamic effective?
The culture of a tour seems, in my experience, comes from the artist. So whatever the artist is like, it's like, I think it's probably true also of like companies, whatever the boss is like, and however the boss behaves, however the artist treats people, is how people treat each other on a tour.
That's interesting.
And I'm very, very lucky in my main bosses, so Jessie, Dewar and Ellie LaRue, have all been incredible, brilliant people, who are also they value everyone who works with them, and they create a culture where everyone is valued. And then that tends to just spread its way throughout the tour. I do think I am unusually lucky in that, because people have their horror stories of tours where people aren't getting on, or where the artist is very remote, or there's just dysfunction. And I've simply never been in an environment like that. I mean, I've done like small gigs or gigs where I haven't, because these are the people that I spent years with. So I was with LaRue for nearly 3 years, with Dua for 2, been with Jessie for 3 and a bit. So those are the big ones. I've been on shorter term things where it hasn't been such a happy camp. And again, that's come primarily from the artist. But then those aren't things that I've committed to long term. I mean, it's because it's refracted through like the way that the artist deals with their management, and then the way that the management, because you obviously end up having quite a bit to do with the management, that can trickle downhill as well. But obviously in terms of your own, what you as a musician or what you as a member of the touring party can do to make that work is the same things that you would do in any social environment, is be considerate and be respectful of people's like of how people are. You just have to, like, again, it's a bit like the rehearsal room. You respect the room that you're in. You sort of have to take the time to get to know people in a a life setting as well as musicians, because and again, your audience will know this, like with musicians, you tend to get to know each other by the way that you play before you actually do all the conventional, like sibling listing and GCSE surveys that people do in ordinary life. Like you hear somebody play, and because they're a really good player, they will play the way that they are, like their personality will come out in their playing, and you'll feel like you get to know them in that particular way, and that gives you a great bond that you wouldn't have normally. And then it just sort of happens. And as long as you're respectful of each other's space and each other's like personal needs, some people need more space than others. Some people are very quiet. Some people like to chat. Some people like to read. Some people don't. Some people like going out for meals and some people don't. And that's all fine. As long as it all sort of comes together for the show.
I think it's a really interesting question, because you're a very accomplished songwriter, and your songwriting has been praised by like Elton John. So like, Elton John, giving that type of compliment and praise is says it all, really. And so this question's quite a devilish question, which is, you've worked with some obviously like really high profile artists, and I'm interested to see what have you learned from them in regards to their craft, but also what do you think they could learn from you in regards to songwriting?
I mean, I don't think any of the successful megastars I've worked with have anything to learn from me about songwriting. What is nice about, again, the bosses that I have had, the major bosses I have had, is that they've all been very engaged with and appreciative of the fact that I am a songwriter independently, and they've always been extremely kind and supportive of those things. Dua came to all our stat shows, like every
Really?
one that I did in the time that we were together, and her mum and dad did as well, because they're amazing. But Ellie Jackson, she was really like, I was mainly inspired. So Stats, the band that I'd started, a lot of the way that we did Stats was inspired by the stuff that I was learning by playing for Ellie and playing in Roux, because I'd suddenly been shown that it wasn't impossible to do these things that were a little bit slicker in terms of stage production and the way that you put it. Learning from William Bauman, who is the drummer in MD in Roux, and then Matty and I went on to play for Dua, and now he runs WFB, which is a massive musical directing company, and he is Jessie's MD too, so he brought me onto that. I learned everything from him about how to put a show together, like in Ableton. He taught me how to use Ableton basically, and I would do it learn on the road by working with studio jams to do with Stats. But just in terms of the presentation of the band and the way that you'd sort of define what it was all about and the meaning of it, it was very inspiring being around that stuff, because Ellie has such a she has such a focus and such a drive about her own aesthetic and her own style, and she's completely in charge of what she wants to do. And I was very inspired by that. I mean, Jessie is just a fabulous songwriter in every way. I mean, she's just 360 degrees of talent. It's like she can sing the birds down from the trees, and the songs that she writes are incredible. And I don't know if I would learn specific things from her, because the best way to learn songwriting is to do it it loads and loads of times and write hundreds and hundreds of rubbish songs, and then eventually you might write one that's all right. And I think that's the same for everybody. I think what I learned from the people I work with is just some of the music is going to rub off on you. So like the particular parts of like very polished and like lavish neo soul that Jessie listens to that I hadn't really listened to that much before. Now I'm starting to hear traces of it in the things that I write.
Interesting.
Just because you're playing it and you're around it and you're just sort of soaking it up. And then the music that other members of the band listen to, like Adenike, who's one of the backing singers with Jessie, she and I like play each other music and send each other music. And she's into all sorts of things that I don't know very well, but would like to. And you sort of end up going down those roads. So it's not just the artists, it's all the people around them. It's the world that you're in, and it's engaging with all the different things that people have that you can learn from. And your style becomes the sum of everything that you've sort of borrowed, I guess.
Love it. Really, really interesting stuff. So think about to the first time you ever wrote a song. How is your approach today? If you to start writing a song this afternoon after this interview, how has your approach differed in that time? So what would be different about how you approach it today when you wrote your first ever song?
I mean, I don't remember when I wrote the first ever song, to be honest. I don't remember the first few hundred, other than that they were awful. But I guess one thing I did when I started writing songs, and also because I wanted to record songs, like I wanted to make records, because I learned, I come from mid Wales, and there were no gigs, there was nowhere to go to see live music. So I learned music mediated through albums, through CDs, and through listening. So it wasn't like I didn't know what these people looked like even very much, because this was like pre-internet. And so my understanding of it was purely from records. And I thought that I do remember thinking that every single aspect of a song as recorded had been planned out in advance. And so I was listening to things like Odelay by Beck, which is obviously made by the Dust Brothers, and is lots of, the stuff they did on Paul's Boutique for the Beastie Boys, but I didn't know what that was. And I thought every single noise had been planned out in advance. And it was like, wow, how do they have the foresight? How do they have the imagination to do that? Like, because it was incredible. It blew my mind. And I guess that was starting to make things made you realize, oh, okay, no. So you don't plan this in advance necessarily. You have a certain amount. So then I sort of went all the other way to like learning about like Neil Young and things, and you want it all to be very real, and you want it, there are these simple songs, and the band, I was obsessed with the band, and you want it all to be very spare and pared back and authentic. And of course, none of it's those words don't really mean anything. But it was good practice for learning how chords work. And I guess now I take there's like two different approaches. There's either the stats approach, which is to be completely unprepared and do nothing in advance and just get people together and play, and then make songs out of whatever that throws up. Or there's do quite a tight melody and quite tight chords and get that all set up before you even record a thing. So voice note it. So don't start and both of those things are designed to avoid demoitis. So it really is just one instrument and a top line that you keep voice noting until it has the shape that it needs to have. Or because then by the time you come to record it, there won't be a demo to spoil the final product. Or there's the stats approach, which is there is no demo because there is no song, but you go into a studio where you're in an environment where everything is captured. So the moment of inspiration, the bit that's good, the bit that will become whatever it is going to become, is captured in a way that you can use it. So it's really there. And I guess that's just 20 years of playing with people in studios and finding out where lightning strikes and how you can make it most likely that you're going to get something good without driving a song into the ground by recording it too many times or making people play in ways that are not the ways that they naturally want to play.
I'm thinking about the with stats and kind of non-stats gigs. If you could go back and experience a stats gig from the perspective of the audience, which one would you choose that you've played?
Oh, I wouldn't want to do that. I would be absolutely mortified.
You got to do it.
I wouldn't want to do it at all. I would want to do one where it was just the band playing and I wasn't there. I would want to watch it, which I have actually obviously done, like standing in sound check and listening to them play. They're all amazing. It's sad to me that Stats, we were kind of victims of the pandemic, and we couldn't tour more, because the second album we made had lots of songs that would have been wonderful to do live, and we only really got to do one show because things sort of, well, it just got away from us, like it did for so many people, and life kind of takes over. But I'd have been interested to see the very, very first Stats gig, which was in like 2013 or something. I think we did the Seabright Arms on Hackney Road, and I think maybe our old friend Jenny Lau was playing the keys. I can't remember, but yeah, one of the really early ones, because I do remember them being quite good as well. Stats were a wonderful band. I loved them.
Yeah, and I mean, you got some absolute bangers, and I was listening to them yesterday actually, and I'd recommend our listeners to check them out. What about from a non-Stats gig? So, what would you say would be one gig that you'd love to be at the back of the audience and just absorb as an experience that you?
Probably, we had a Jessie show at. I mean, the Ali Pali ones were very, very special. She did 2 nights at Ali Pali, and they were great. But the one I really would like to see from the audience point of view was we had 2 nights at Brixton Academy on the previous tour, on the What's Your Pleasure tour. And one night, my wife brought our 4-month-old baby, Eleanor, which was an insane decision because it's a completely unsuitable environment for an infant, but we were still a bit manic about babies, so she brought her. But the other night was had its own kind of quite spectacular guest, because Jessie had a song out at the time with Kylie Minogue, and although I had played on Kylie and Dua had a song together. Dua did a remix version of her song Real Groove for Studio 2054, and I played guitar on that, which was where I first met Samson Jatto, who plays for Jessie. But I never met Kylie because she wasn't there. But I was like incredibly, because Kylie is obviously an icon, and growing up, she was just a huge part of the musical landscape, and I love her. And Jessie and Kylie had a song out at that time called Kiss of Life, around the time of the Brixton Academy show, and we knew that this, whichever night it was Kylie's birthday, and so Jessie had invited Kylie to come on stage and sing the song. But we didn't know if she was going to come. We didn't know if she'd do it because she's Kylie. She does what she wants. But there was a dressing room backstage that was like Kylie Minogue, and like a glam room and everything, and all the space was reserved. But nobody turned up. No one was there, with no indication whether she was coming on or not. So we went on stage not knowing if she was going to come on or not. And we started playing Kiss of Life, and I was playing the bass on Kiss of Life, and I'm stage left, up stage left on the riser, and we just, Samson and I had launched in, and then suddenly this figure comes past my right shoulder, just sort of strides on, and the noise, because we were talking earlier about in-ear monitors, but and usually I don't have that much of the crowd because I don't need to hear the crowd. I need to hear Samson. Like, I just want to hear Samson, Jessie, the click, a little bit of ambience, but that's it. But the noise was astonishing. And our front of house engineer, Pete, he said that it was measured about 115 decibels.
Wow.
And Kylie, there she is. That's actual Kylie Minogue, like, walks past me and goes to the front stage and starts singing with Jessie. She just comes in for her first line. She hits the mark absolutely as her first line comes in. And it was nuts. And the place is going bananas. And they got to the end of the song, and obviously the house is falling down. And Jessie said, "Oh, Kylie, it's your birthday." And I think they brought her out a cake. I think somebody produced a cake from someone. It was brought on stage. And Jessie was like, "Right, let's sing you Happy Birthday." And I'm like, okay, because I've never played Happy Birthday before. I don't know how it goes. And there's a piano sound has emerged. And now I have to play Happy Birthday for Kylie in front of Kylie and 5,000 people losing their minds. And so we sang her Happy Birthday. And then she went off again. And then she was gone. And I've still never met her. So I've played for her twice, and I've still never met her. But I would love to have seen that from the front, because the audience were unreal. They were so happy. They were so excited. It was brilliant. And everybody on stage was suddenly like, she's here. She's come. It's great.
So what?
And she's obviously just super cool.
Yeah, I mean, so what did you do when it came to the part? Like, so did you just like go, right, here's a key?
I hit a big chord, and figured like, okay, so happy, that's probably the tonic, and then it's going to be the fifth. Sounds like a 7, and back to the tonic, and sort of bust through it.
Well done.
But also, you've got 5,000 people who want this to go well.
Yeah.
Everybody wants this to be fun and a success. Literally nobody is thinking, I think that might have been a 2 chord there. It should have been a 4. Like, everybody wants you to win. So it's just fun. And without, those are the things that you remember.
Nice tie-in that you mentioned about your 4-month-old being at the show. My first daughter is named after a character that Kylie Minogue played in Nick Cave songs. My first daughter's named Eliza Day, and she did
from
where the Wild Rose. Yeah. And so that brings me on to being a parent and touring, and just being a parent and musician. The music industry is known for its kind of fluctuating salaries and its lack of, the ups and downs. Let's say that we've got listeners right now who are becoming parents, who are musicians and wanting to make a full-time living out of being a musician. Give us 2 or 3 bits of advice, that kind of the do's and don'ts when it comes to being a parent and a gigging musician doing it full-time.
Well, there's no way around it. It's extremely hard. And the reason, so the baby we were talking about before, she's actually our second, and the first, our son, who's now 7. When he was born, that's when I stopped touring with Dua, and that's why I stopped touring with Dua.
Right.
Because we were already doing, I don't know, like 250 nights away a year probably at that point, and we'd been doing that for 2 years. And it was an incredibly exciting gig. And part of me was obviously sad to stop, because things had just started going really well as well. New rules had just hit, and it was all about to go stratospheric. But at the same time, there was no way I was going to miss being his dad and looking after him and being, taking on that sort of primary carer role. And I didn't tour again until Jessie, which was 4 years later, because she has 3 children. And so again, part of the reason why it was possible was that insofar as touring can ever be family friendly, this would be. I think the industry is changing a bit, but really there isn't a simple way to make it more family friendly. Bringing family on tour is not feasible. And once they get a bit older, it's fine. I mean, now that the little one is approaching 3, it's less arduous when I go away, but I still, try not to go away as much as possible, because if I'm away for 2 or 3 weeks, it puts an unacceptable strain on my wife, because she works full time. She's got a real job. So somebody has to make some pretty big sacrifices somewhere down the line. And that is the reality of it. I mean, the rest of the time, when our son was born, then I started to try doing things that were just based at home instead. And that's actually when Stats happened. Stats only really happened when I was home from Dua, because I was never here to do anything when I couldn't make much of it. And we started releasing records fairly soon after that. And that's when we got our deal with Memphis Industries and sort of took it that way. But for actual work, I was having I wanted to do composing. I wanted to do stuff in TV and media. But it takes time to build that up. Obviously, I started by doing podcast themes and things like that, because a lot of people were making podcasts at the time. And sort of building up and trying to get a reel together. And then I got a bit of a break and got my first TV series. But that again it's a long process, because you have to realize, and again, this is part of like respecting whatever room literal or figurative you're in, somebody, a lot of people, that's been their dream all along, and they've been trying to do that since day one, and they have all the skills and they have all the sort of the unknowable things that you only get from actually doing a job, and you're sort of trying to break into this as a side hustle, and it's again, this isn't really, I guess this isn't really advice so much as cautionary tales. Like it is tough to be a touring musician, but if you're getting stuck into things at home, and if you find a way to make it work, making music for things, whether that's for media or ads or library music or production music or anything that you can theoretically do, then that's much more feasible. But touring is more reliable in some ways.
This isn't for you to say, because you'd be too modest to say this, but I would expect, given how closely you worked with Dua at the beginning of her career, that I'd imagine when you told her that you were having to stop because of this reason, she probably felt she was losing a bit of a musical safety net, I'd imagine, given that you've done so much with her. How did she take that news, and do you think there would ever be a door to go back to that work?
Dua was incredibly supportive, and always has been, and she understood completely, because Dua comes from a very, very close and incredibly important family network. Like, her family are amazing people, all of them. Her mum and dad, her little sister Rena, and her little brother Jin. They were so much a part of our lives, day to day touring. All of them. And like I say, her mum and dad used to come to my shows, and we would meet up on holidays and stuff. And so she understood completely. She's such a family person. She didn't try and talk me out of it. She didn't question it at all. She was just completely supportive. She gave like incredibly nice gifts, and she brought us all sorts of things when the baby was born, with lovely photos of them together. And that was never in doubt. I think it would be immodest of me to say that it was like a devastating loss for her. But obviously we had done a lot of things together, and it was a very important time. And Dua is someone who really values everyone around her, and she's incredibly loyal and supportive. And obviously we're still in touch. And I saw her at Glastonbury this year for the first time in person in a long time, and that was amazing.
That was going to be my question, actually. Where did you watch that show? Because that was an iconic moment.
Well, I was performing at Glastonbury anyway, because I was with Jessie. We were playing the next night. Dua was so I was in the area anyway, because Jessie was playing Saturday night at Westholtz, and Dua was on a Friday night. And so William Bauman, who I mentioned earlier, he and Pete invited me to come and watch the show, to come to sort of backstage beforehand, which was really, really sweet and kind of them, because obviously knew I'd be there, and they're like, oh, it'd be nice for you to be there to close the circle. So because the very first shows we did for Dua were literally like 6 people in a pub. Like it was like tiny things. So to have been part of that journey was obviously a big thrill. So it was kind of them to invite me. So I came down on a Friday night and went backstage, and lots of people who are in her band. Obviously, Matty Carroll, who's bass player, he's been there since day one. He was with me, and William was the third one in the band, and he's still there. He's still doing it. But so many of the people on that stage and off it, like Smiley, who plays the drums, we play together with Jessie, and Ben Hukin is one of the dancers. Naomi does the BBs. She used to babysit for my little boy when he was, there's too many people to list. And Will Nicholson, who does the front of house, Alex Cheruti does monitors. They were the people that I'd lived with for all that time, and they were all still doing it. So they were all around backstage, and it was just lovely seeing them. And then, Dua's dad and her brother and sister were around, and I was just having a great sort of time catching up with everybody backstage. But again, backstage before a show, you don't really want to be there. You don't want to get in people's way. There's like a sitting area. You just sit back. If you see people, you say hi, but you don't take up their time, don't take up their mental space. They're about to play the biggest show of their career. But a lot of these lovely people are just, I kind of go back so far with them that it was really nice. I didn't feel like I was in the way. They were so sweet. And so when the actual show came around, James Trude and Katie and Charles who were from WFB with Williams Company. We were all going to just go and watch it out front in the field with everybody else, because that's where it's most exciting, right? There's whatever viewing area you have, it's probably going to be a bit naff. So we wanted to go and see it out in front. So we walked out to make for the arena itself, and I wasn't expecting to see Dua at all. But there she was. She was in a corridor. She was having some pictures taken. They were doing some like pre gig photos, and there was her with a bunch of other people, this and that. And I was just sort of sneaking past, just walking, just trying to get past. And she saw me, and she, like, her eyes just went, and she just ran over to me, and she picked me up. She physically picked me up, and it was, I mean, I'm going to get very emotional even talking about it now, but because, you know, she's not much, she's pretty tall anyway, and she was wearing these huge shoes, and she just picked me up off the ground, and we just held on to each other for a long time. And I can't even really remember what we said, but it was so wonderful to see her there where she absolutely deserves to be. And everybody who's on that stage is there because they belong there, and they're all absolutely fitted perfectly for what they're doing. And it's such a joy to see, and to have even been like a little part of that, and to help Dua maybe remind her of just how far she'd come. I mean, I'm sure she didn't need reminding of that, but like, I remember the Railway Inn in Winchester. I remember her and me sitting in departures in Paris after a day of trawling around radio stations playing Be the One over and over and over again, like, and putting up with the rubbish interviews that she had to do and all the stuff. We were there, we did it. And maybe in some way it was nice to be, it was lovely to see all of that come to its perfect fruition. And then to watch the show, I mean, she was incredible. She was just incredible.
Sounds perfect. It was so nourishing hearing that, and I'd imagine it very nourishing for you to, having got on that journey. There'll be so many musicians listening to this who played those gigs and played those pubs, and it didn't amount to anything. It's just a beautiful journey that you've gone on, and that your role, you facilitated that for her in many ways, and I think that's amazing. We're going to begin to wrap up in a moment. Question for you: what do you think needs to change in the music industry? Or what do you think most needs to change in the music industry?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to get away from the fundamental problem that it has been made acceptable for a variety of, no doubt, well-intentioned reasons, to think of music as something that you don't have to pay for. And that music has become something which is A, free, and B, an accompaniment to something else. So music is something that you put on a video. Music is something that you watch. Music is like something that's sort of on the background, and that there's this, because it was technologically possible for it to be not paid for, that became just normal. Yeah. And anyone who's not involved in the production of music, when you break down to them how it's actually made to sound as good as it does, and how much it costs to make a record that sounds as good as lots of records do, is staggered by how much it costs. And they're like, well, how does that work when you're getting a fraction of a penny for a stream? And the unsayable answer is that it doesn't. And then there's this canard that, oh, well, all the money's in live. It's like, well, not really, because if an artist of even like medium tier size is looking at how they're going to put their show together and their tour, and they're not selling any units, they're not selling any they don't have any income from the music that they make, which is the reason that people come to the shows, then how many musicians are they going to be able to take? How much production are they going to be able to do? How many hotels can they afford to pay for? Like, it sounds simplistic, but it's just like, it's an economic reality that you can't get away from. I mean, short of anything changing that, then I think what the Music Venue Trust are doing, and what Tom Graham and the Ivors and PRS people are doing in terms of like trying to get support for grassroots venues is obviously a very good thing. I mean, with Dua was obviously backed by a major label from pretty early doors, but the venues that we played and the circuit that we played on at the beginning was the same as the one that I've been doing in indie bands for years and years before that. And that circuit works. Like, that circuit is an amazing bit of like artistic infrastructure, which deserves investment at the highest level. But again, the model that those venues are presented with of like profit sharing, like this sort of slice of the pie kind of idea, just doesn't really apply to them, because so much of live has been gobbled up by extremely large companies that I don't know. It's not. If it was ever true that, oh well, the money's in live, you should go and do gigs, it's not true anymore. Like, I don't know how I don't know where artists are supposed to rehearse now. Like, it's so expensive. It's certainly in London. When I got to London, like getting on for 20 years ago, there were a lot of rehearsal studios that were pretty cheap to work in, and there were a lot of little venues. There are a lot of places to play, and everything I got out of music basically came out of the scene that my little band was involved in back then. Everyone I've met, everything that led to anything, everything that led to what I've been able to do came from doing little gigs in London and being part of a scene and meeting people. And if you have an economic reality where all of that stuff is just subject to the vagaries of the property market, then all of the scenes in those cities will die. Obviously that's just one way of doing it. And yeah, sure, there's online now, but I don't know if it's quite the same. I'm too old to really answer that question properly. But yes, paying for things would be good.
That would be a start, wouldn't it? Let's finish on Fleabag. Tell us your relationship with the TV program Fleabag, because this is a very cool story.
Well, so my band Stats, our song "Lose It" was called. Phoebe Waller-Bridge did an interview with Laverne, where she described "Lose It" as the unofficial Fleabag anthem, which is very kind of her. Now, full disclosure, her sister Izzo was in the band. Because Izzo and I have known each other for years, and when I was starting to put the band that became Stats together, Izzo and a boy called Duncan Brown, who was in my very first band, and a drummer called John Barrett, they were the first, and a bass player called Stu Barter, who was from a wonderful band called Left for Pictures. They were the first for Stats, and so Izzo and I got, and at this stage when we started doing that, Fleabag was still a show that her little sister was taking to Edinburgh over and over again. And we sort of watched it. We just watched it grow and watched it become this incredible thing. And obviously, as I was doing the music for that series, and I think at one point they did consider putting Loser in the show, which would have been obviously lovely. But it was just to be rated. And Phoebe came to our last show, the last Stats show we ever did at the Lexington as well, and she's always just been incredibly supportive and nice about to be rated by someone who's that good is a real honor. It's the same as having Jessie listen to a song that I've done and be like, oh, that's a good song. Like, thank you. That's you don't need any more than that. Like, to be esteemed by people you respect is a real honor.
And you've got a lot out there who clearly do. So what's next for you?
Yeah, so what's next for me? I've got I've actually started writing a new thing, but that's very far from being ready for public consumption yet. But I've started writing songs with a friend who is into very eccentric modern string music. So that sounds quite fun. Where that's going. And when Jessie makes a new record, it will be exciting to get involved with that. And other than that, I'm making more music for screen, so for films and TV and adverts and things like that. So.
And it was Tarantino was once doing an interview with Jonathan Ross, and I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but I think it's such an interesting interaction they had where Jonathan Ross asked Tarantino, "How comes you never get someone to write music for your films?" And this was a few years ago before he's recently started doing it. And Tarantino was very, very avoidant of the question. And fair play to Jonathan Ross, he kept prodding away, and Tarantino kept pushing it back. And the third time he kind of really went for it, Jonathan Ross, because remember at the time he was doing like film 2010, whatever it was. And eventually Tarantino admitted, he said, "Oh, okay, I'll tell you. The reason is I don't get someone to write music for my films is I don't want someone else having more control over my film than me." Which says a lot about the power of writing music to briefs. So from your perspective, when you're writing for TV series and stuff like that, where does your power begin and end? And you can replace the word power if you want, but that kind of, in that Tarantino kind of analogy, where does that kind of begin and end, and how does that relationship work with maybe reinterpreting a scene accidentally?
Well, obviously you do wield a lot of influence over how any scene is going to be viewed and how people are going to feel about it, and that's the excitement of it. I mean, that's what's most fun about it. You are. I think what's satisfying about it is that you are part of a collaborative process, though, where you are ultimately serving somebody else's vision. And whether that's the director or the production team, or if there's a showrunner, then I always defer ultimately to those people because it's their thing. But I think that what's exciting is when you can take the ideas they've had about music, because everybody understands that power, and so everybody comes to a scene with ideas about how music's going to work in it, and they're all valid, and they're because everybody does understand music, like it's universal in that way, and you are the interpreter of those ideas in a practical sense. So working in collaboration with directors where they have a temp track in place, for example, and you really have to work with them to be like, oh, what is it you like about that temp track? Like, you have to work out, is it, usually I find it's the pace. It's the same answer I give to every question. It's the actual time of it. It's like there will be something about the track that they've chosen that rhythmically fits with the scene that they've cut. Because obviously I don't even get to start working on something until it's been cut and until it's locked. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. But drilling into, like, is it that you like, or is it the genre of whatever the music is? And I did a show with a company called Slam Films for ITV that was like a British wrestling sitcom, and it was really fun. And they didn't want to go down the stereotypical wrestling music route, so they didn't want to have hard rock. That's what they knew, and they had a tone where they wanted to be much more like northwest of England. They wanted it to be like New Brighton. They wanted it to be a lot more kind of holiday campy, not camp, but like Butt Lindsay.
Yeah. And
it was so fun. They hit on this idea of having it be a bit rockabilly, and I was like, yeah, okay, brilliant. So a bit rockabilly, and how about also a little bit northern soul, for the era and for the area. And we ended up with this sort of Elvis in Vegas, but like the Oxfam version. And yeah, like charity shop Elvis in Vegas. And it was so fun to do because it ticked their boxes. It got what they wanted out of the reference, but it also, and not unhappily, those were genres that I felt very confident working in. And that gave me but within that framework, they gave me a lot of freedom, because they once they felt that I understood the broad vision that they were going for, then they gave me a huge amount of leeway to do that.
That's the ideal brief, isn't it? Freedom in a framework is basically the ideal brief for anything.
Yeah, because limitlessness is a prison. But it's the same as working with stats or working in a pop band or anything else. It's the collaborative part of it, and recognizing how to contribute to the overall vision, and then bowing to whoever's vision that is, like who ultimately is the person whose expression is being is being worked on here? Who are we trying to support? And I just find the TV stuff immensely fun for that reason.
Well, listen, thank you for your wisdom and insight and sharing so much and giving us that VR headset at the beginning. There's so many interesting elements.
Shut the world out.
Yeah, that's it. And get the stats back together as and when. And make sure that you'll continue to produce such great music. And thank you for being such a great guest on the StageLeft podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.